Today, I want to talk to you about the recent theatrical release, The Fall Guy, directed by David Leitch. And the way I want to tell you about it is to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. You may or may not recognize David Leitch's name. He's a director that got his big break directing Atomic Blonde, starring Charlize Theron, back in, I think it was 2017. I thought it was an excellent action movie, and I think that movie helped him get his next bigger theatrical release, Deadpool 2. That led to Hobbs and Shaw, that Fast and Furious spinoff, which then eventually led to Bullet Train, his most recent release before this one. And I thought an excellent, very unique, interesting, well-directed movie. David Leitch's record of very good directing jobs in these previous releases is what led me to go ahead and watch The Fall Guy, despite what I thought was a kind of mid-trailer. As promised, I want to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of this theatrical release. And we're going to start here with the good. The leads of The Fall Guy are Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. And for this kind of movie, which is essentially a romantic comedy with action scenes in it, in terms of what it actually delivers emotionally, it's key that their chemistry and their performances are very good. And I'm happy to say that they are. I'm not a huge Ryan Gosling fan, to be honest. But he has certain performances that I've been very impressed by, and this is one of them. I think he felt like the perfect person to play the role that was written on the page. Emily Blunt does an excellent job too. She's got some good moments to herself, and I think their chemistry works very well on screen. Because The Fall Guy is an ode to stuntmen, I think it was important for the director to use as many practical stunts and effects as possible. And honestly, in this day of so much CGI, I as a viewer appreciate things that really feel visceral and feel like you're really seeing stunt work being done, and it's not all just wires and green screen. And they have their share of those things too. And in the after credits, they show clips of them kind of doing the sequences. Definitely stay for the credits if you go see it, because there's a lot of interesting behind the scenes stuff that they show at the beginning of the credits, and they have like a mid credit thing. So you don't want to run out the theater when it's over. And I don't think you're going to want to do that anyway. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So there's a lot of practical effects. I think they're executed fairly well, and I think that is something that this movie makes me very much appreciate. The movie is the use of those effects and how they're integrated pretty seamlessly into the film. One of the things I really appreciated about The Fall Guy was its attention to detail. There are sequences where there are post-its all around, and you can actually read the post-its as the scene's going on, and they all have little interesting things written on them. Some are references to other things, some are just abstract, random, kind of silly things. But you also have scenes where you have characters in the movie revolves around movie studios and movie production, and there are other movie posters and there's little kind of inside jokes and plays on other movies, but with the characters from this movie placed into them. So there's stuff like that. There's all kind of little details like that all throughout the movie. The movie kind of within the movie, they talk a lot about, and a lot of details about that. So there's a lot of fun they're playing with a lot of that stuff. And to me, it gives a richness to a movie when it feels like there's a lot of thought was put into even the little things when it came to a movie. I feel like this movie is, or was, the director's, a passion project of the directors. Not just because of the relationship as a stuntman, but also because of all of the attention to detail that I saw in it. And Bullet Train had the same thing though. So I'll say this might just be part of this director's MO, is this attention to detail. But I really noticed it here, and looking at the movie within the movie, or the all the things that were happening below the surface that you could certainly ignore, but there's a lot there to find on second watch and what have you. So if I ever watch this again, I'd definitely be trying to read more of the post-its, or try to check out all of the movie posters in the backgrounds, which, you get distracted by, the actual movie happening. Sometimes you miss a lot of those details. So that's kind of nice to see in the film. Aside from the practical effects aspect of it, generally the set pieces / action scenes, however you want to refer to them, were fairly well done. And I think that that's also a kind of a feather in this director's cap, is that he's very good at directing the scenes and making them feel connected to them, and you know what's going on. I hate watching an action scene and not really understanding what's happening. His scenes tend to be able to follow very well, as if maybe they were perhaps very well laid out initially with a storyboarding. But they're pretty well easy, pretty good to follow, have kind of like big moments that are kind of like eye-popping. So I thought they were pretty well done. As I mentioned earlier, this is as much a rom-com as it is an action movie. And that being the case, it's important that the dialogue be punchy, that you get some laughs out of it, but it also connect emotionally. And I thought they did a pretty good job writing dialogue that had that effect. Because without that, you probably don't get the chemistry that you get. You obviously don't get the laughs that you want to have if you're not writing good dialogue. And I thought they did a pretty good job with that. So that's the good. But unfortunately, it wasn't all good. There are a couple things that I would put into the bad category. The first thing I put in the sort of bad category is the story. The story is a pretty basic one, very straightforward. You've kind of seen this essential type of story before. There are also not a lot of turns in it. You're going to see most of what happens coming. You're going to say, oh yeah, of course this happens. That happens. My daughter I watched it with, she anticipated a lot of the things that were going to happen. Although she, like me, is intellectual about movies. But it's a movie that's more so about how it's told than what it's telling. And if you're coming to this movie hoping for something to catch you off guard, to send you where you don't expect, this is probably not the right movie. This is a movie to just go in. Pretty quickly, you're going to get an idea, okay, this is the kind of movie I'm watching. This is boy meets girl, etc., type of movie. And it's just about how it's told and whether or not it can pull you in, despite the fact that you know kind of what it's trying to do to you and where it's going. Can it pull you in? I think it does. I think it works. But that's something that's, I think, a fair critique of the type of story it's telling. It's telegraphed pretty obviously. Second thing, and it's kind of related, there's not the most tension in the action sequences. I think they're fairly well done, as I appreciate the practical effects. I appreciate, overall, I thought they were impressive action scenes in general. But there's not a ton of tension because, again, this is a story that is fairly predictable. And because of that, the action scenes also have a degree of predictableness because obviously they're related to the story that's going on around them. So if the story itself is predictable, it kind of makes the action scenes fairly predictable as well. And that's not uncommon with action movies. There are tons of action scenes where you know what's going to happen. But it's certainly still a negative when in the moment, and this only happens sometimes, but sometimes in the moment, ideally a movie makes you forget the broader story and pulls you into the moments of the action scenes and makes you wonder and have concern for the characters and what have you. And this one does that sometimes, but then sometimes it doesn't. And especially with longer sequences, you can start to know what is or isn't going to happen, and your mind starts wandering, and you pull out of the moment. And there's one sequence in particular around the middle of the movie where I started to think about, okay, well, I know what is or isn't going to happen, and now I'm kind of just waiting for it to end. So there's a bit of that in there as well. So that's the good and the bad. But what about the ugly? Well, the good news is there's nothing I really call ugly about The Fall Guy. I enjoyed it a fair amount. I thought it was a well-executed movie overall. And despite the issues that I pointed out earlier in this video, it was a pleasant experience. At this point, in my 10-point rating scale, I give it a 7 or an 8. I'm leaning towards 8. I'll probably watch it again, maybe a year from now. And by default, I probably edge it slightly more towards 8. It's clearly a movie that is successful in trying to do what it set out to do. And despite the flaws that I found in it generally, some action scenes work better than others, and story was, as I said, fairly predictable. But I still enjoy watching it. I never felt like I wish this movie would end, or these are big mistakes going on here, you're losing me. It didn't. It had me pretty quickly from the start of the movie. It held on to me pretty good all the way through. And that's what you want from a movie that draws you in, holds you, and only lets you go when the movie's over. And I thought The Fall Guy did that. So I definitely recommend it if you like action movies, with some comedy, with some maybe a little bit of romance. I think it delivers on those fronts. If you watched this far, I appreciate you checking out my review of The Fall Guy. Please consider liking and subscribing, and watch one of these other videos that you're seeing on the screen right now. And thanks for watching Low Key Classic Movies.